Now that we have reached the end of Amphoreus and are saying goodbye to the characters we've spent the last few months getting to know, I think it's about time to make another analysis video on the most popular couple of men to come out of this planet. Yes, my darling viewers, we are finally doing a full analysis of Phainon and Mydei, from their humble beginnings as two foolish youths playing in the baths to the titans we see in the present. Now, before you start this, I do suggest you watch my previous brief history of Phaidei, as I will probably be skipping over a lot of the things that I went over in there, just for the sake of my own sanity and time. The link to that will be in the description. And of course, there are a few disclaimers. Though we are talking about their relationship in general, we are also talking about their shippability. So if that isn't your thing, the door is right over there. And also in this video, we will be covering chapters 3.0 to 3.7. So if you haven't finished all of Amphoreus yet, I suggest you step away for now, or at least don't come after me for the spoilers we're about to dive into. Now, while making this video, I realized that because the story is so long, nearly 50 hours of in-game content, not counting the external material, I will have to break my analysis into several sections. I may also have to gloss over some things for time, or leave certain parts out due to unclear or speculative details, so please keep that in mind as we continue along. I do think eventually I'll have to make a third part because there's just so much material. So if you don't see something covered here, it will most likely be covered eventually. So please be patient while this little Hime tries her best. Hi guys. Future Hime here. There will definitely be a third video because I got halfway through this and realized there's no way I could do just one more video about them. I do have to do a third one. So you're welcome, I guess. Anyways, back to the video. Before we get to them as a pairing, I think it's important to talk about them as individuals first. Not only that, but their origins and inspirations also help us understand why it is so easy to see them as something much more than what is blatantly given to us in the game. Let's first then dive into Mydei, the Kremnoan prince with an immortal body. Mydei was born to Eurypon and Gorgo, the king and queen of Castrum Kremnos. In some loops, he is estranged from his family, much like in Reoccurrence X36, where we are first introduced to him. In others, he remains on good terms with them, as seen in Reoccurrence 8128, where he is sent to the Grove to study. And, of course, in Reoccurrence X37, where Castrum Kremnos' royal family joins in on the flame chase journey. Across all loops, his personality remains consistent. Though he may seem aloof or hard-edged at times, he carries the weight and responsibility of his destiny, and of the people he must protect. He is the kind of person who would throw himself into danger without hesitation if it means keeping others safe. This isn't in the self-sacrificing way that Phainon tends to do, but in a more all-encompassing, matter-of-fact way. He knows this is the destiny he's meant to uphold, and he does so without hesitation. Beyond this, he is also very caring and gentle. This is evident in the way that people speak of him. Although the Kremnoans sometimes have a bad reputation among the people of Okuma, Mydei alone commands respect above all. The character of Mydei is based on a few mythological and real-life people. A hodgepodge of different myths and legends come together in one form. In a way, I feel like this was done on purpose, to emphasize the larger-than-life hero that Mydei is supposed to be. Even the place of which he was raised is somewhat based on a legend itself. Castrum Kremnos is built on the kind of expectations and disciplined ideas we associate with the Greek city-state of Sparta. Although there are many differences between Castrum Kremnos and Sparta, the two share very similar core values. Both share in a tough, disciplined way of living, one built more on a militaristic, warrior-focused structure than anything you'd find in Akuma. Now, why I bring up Sparta may become more clear as I move on. First, let's talk about other Greek references used for Mydei's character. Although I'd like to go deeper into other historic references that he embodies, like Perseus, Deimos, and even touch a bit on Gilgamesh, I think that's better saved for a video solely about him. For now, let's focus on the similarities he has to Alexander the Great and Achilles. In my previous video, I talked about Alexander the Great's closest companions and how their dynamic mirrors Mydei's relationship with similarly named men in-game. Alexander's inner circle were more than just comrades in arms. They were his 𝒖𝒑𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂, an elite group who served as both protectors and advisors. Those five played an equally important role in Mydei's life, echoing the same closeness and trust. With Hephaestion specifically, they liked to call him Alexander's best friend, but we all know what historians really mean when they say that. Whether or not the writers intended it, choosing the name Hephaestion places a very specific weight on how we read Mydei's relationships, especially to the men who occupy the same role in his life, particularly with a certain white-haired man. And though the Alexander parallels do a lot of heavy lifting, there's another figure that stands out as well. Much like Mydei, there was a prophecy, or at least a fear, that leads Achilles to be dipped into the river Styx. For Achilles, it is the hope to keep him safe. For Mydei, it's to keep him from killing his own father. Both acquired a unique type of immortality, with an equally unique vulnerability. Although this is the main parallel between them, there's another characteristic of their story that Achilles shares with Alexander the Great, and that was his relationship with Patroclus. Patroclus and Achilles grew up together, best friends and comrades throughout their lives. When Patroclus dies, his ghost comes to Achilles in a dream, asking that their bones be buried together and their ashes mixed. Once again, many historians frame these men as nothing more than best friends. But I think we can come to our own conclusions, just as much as I'm sure we've all come to our own conclusions about the man that these two served as a basis for. In essence, guys, what I'm really trying to say here is that Mydei is gay. Or at least queer-coded, because what other conclusion am I supposed to come to when he's clearly inspired by two of the most iconic Greek homosexual figures, and his homeland is based on Sparta? And yes, I do know I could have just left the first 8 minutes of this video aside and came to this conclusion very easily by just saying he's ancient Greek. But y'all, what's the fun of making a video essay if I don't take almost 10 minutes to get to my point? Unfortunately, in my first video, I didn't focus on Phainon's out-of-game references, and to be honest, I don't think I'll do that here either. Outside of Kevin having the very obvious 𝑧𝒐𝒂𝒂𝒐 and his namesake being exceptionally beautiful in Greek, none of it really fits into any theory of Phaidei, not to mention that it took us 7 whole patches to get to Phaimon's full story. But still, I think it's important to go over some particulars, because Phainon has a lot of versions of himself. There's the Phainon we know best, but there's also his other counterparts, Caslana, the Flame Reaver, and his final digi-evolution, Angelnon. Although each of his incarnations feel like a completely different person, they all end up circling the same core function. Phainon is a man who has spent every lifetime living for other people. His own wishes don't make that list, or rather, they don't exist at all. His zero cycle self may not have carried as much weight as those who came after him, but the Phainon we have come to know is definitely defined by this instinct to put himself last, no matter the cost. He is someone who begins as an idealistic and dutiful person, someone who wants to be a hero, not because it was expected of him, but because he truly believes in the good that he could do by being one. He comes across as gentle and composed, yet under all of that, he harbors a deep wrath and vengefulness that he could never allow to surface. He fulfills his duty because that is what he was made for, but also because it seems like it's the only thing he knows how to do. To be Phainon is to walk a constant line between the person he strives to be and the darkness he refuses to unleash. Each of his evolutions are different stages of a life that is slowly unraveling. Phainon is the version that still tries for heroism and idealism, while Kashlana comes after 33 million cycles of murder and death. The Flame Reaver is a result of having no strength left to fight against the weight of destiny, clinging to the mission because it's the only thing still driving him forward. The darkness that the Flame Reaver represents and the hellish loops that Kashlana had to endure are passed on to a willing sacrifice, allowing the most recent Phainon to unleash the power of all the cores that has been collected. This enables him to finally become something that might be able to fulfill the wishes that he has been fighting for all this time, to bring the dawn and the hope of tomorrow. In my opinion, the two men match each other because of their similarities in both personality and tragedy. Both live under the shadow of expectation and the dark weight of destiny. Phainon needs someone who can stand up to him, someone who can meet the force of his anger without fear. Mydei, in turn, needs someone who challenges him, someone who sees past the prince and understands what he is unable to say. There are probably better ways to go about analyzing their relationship, like identifying themes or situations where their relationship feels more real than others. But when you have a relationship that spans millions of cycles and trillions of years, it might just be better to start from the beginning, the very beginning. The first time Phainon becomes aware of the ruler is during a tarot card reading by Cyrene. Mydei's tarot, in this case, stands for discipline, authority, glory, but also isolation and warfare. Phainon comments that Mydei's story of bloodshed feels far away, yet stirs the imagination, a statement that was born of the naivety of youth. This is probably the only time in his life that he would ever know peace, and in a lot of ways, that is the great tragedy of Phainon. When we finally get to talking to the crystallized memories of the future, there are two heirs that he talks to individually. One of them happens to be Mydei, a half-naked show-off that Phainon can't believe he'll ever be friends with, much less someone he'll end up sharing a bath with at some point. I do find it ironic that Phainon has such an aversion to associating with Mydei in these very first moments, but of course so does our avatar, as we talk about how he will become quite entangled with him as a central and important figure in Mydei's story. And one day he'll be able to grant his wishes, although maybe not in the way he thinks. Later in the Zero Cycle, we finally get to see how they first meet, or at least how they first meet in this cycle. There is no battle for 10 days and 10 nights, just a weary prince looking for a place where his people can live in peace and be treated as equals by those around him. Phainon steps forward to represent Akuma in a duel that isn't a fight between blades, but between convictions. Mydei places his mother's signet ring on the scale to represent the 1,000 years of conviction his people bring and the weight of fate that Mydei himself carries. Phainon, in the end, puts the Deliverer card on the scale, the last remnant of a home that no longer exists. And us, the hero within, a destiny to bring everyone's wishes, including Mydei's and his people's, into the future. I think one of the reasons why they went out of their way to show how Mydei and Phainon meet is to show how inevitable it was that they did so. It establishes a pattern that is destined to repeat. Before we get into later recurrences, specifically the 𝑥36 and 𝑥37 recurrences, I want to also go over the two other recurrences that we get in the 3.4 story quest. 2691 is the recurrence we see while opening up shards of recollections in the Vortex of Genesis. In this cycle, Mydei and Phainon are all that is left of the Flame Reaver's devastation. Phainon makes a request, one of the very few he makes on his own behalf. He tells Mydei that he wants to see the Era Nova with him at his side, a plea that comes out just this side of desperate. But Mydei already knows his fate was always one where Phainon would go on to meet the end alone. After all, this is what the prophecy states. So when Mydei tells Phainon to go ahead, it's his attempt to push the one person he thinks deserves to see the era forward. His last lines carry a promise to him. One more victory, one more toast, one more impossible vow held up against a future he isn't sure he'll ever reach. The second recurrence isn't one between Mydei and Phainon, but between Mydei and the Flame Reaver, or as we call him then, Kashlana. It is obvious that Mydei knows who this is, and that this man is not his friend. There is no confusion or hesitation in the way that he speaks to him. Whatever bond they once had was already buried under cycles of repetition and violence. This cycle is important because it shows just how much Kashlana cherishes Mydei, even now. He remembers the way Mydei once said his name, and he clings to it so tightly that he promises to etch Mydei's words into his heart, as he does every cycle. In a way, that first wish, the one Mydei made as a crystallized memory in the first cycle, to battle blade to blade with the Flame Reaver, is fulfilled over and over again. But it is fulfilled in the most cruelest way possible to the man that he made the wish to. There are two other things I'd like to point out from this section, one of them being the Trailblaze mission description. It really highlights how this has affected Kashlana. How many times he's had to kill his friend and burn what is technically a place that is special to them both. The last thing is a little less depressing, though I think in some ways it can be. On Twitter, I saw a cut of their battle, and though at the time of playing, I had been quite beside myself with sadness over the pairing, I had not realized that there was way more sus than I had been aware of. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, well, I'll let them talk for themselves.
Conquer this world, or be conquered by me. Oh, glory, I salute you. That's all I ever wanted. Well fought.
Now, it'd be somewhat redundant to go over their entire story all over again, especially since most of my analysis of 𝑥36 was already covered in my first video, but I did want to go over some key moments now that we have the benefit of foresight. Let's start with the Cremnoan Festival, the spine of Phainon and Mydei's relationship. It's something that comes up repeatedly throughout their story, something they wanted to recreate together again and again, something that feels almost like their own version of a promise ceremony. The first time the festival is mentioned is when we challenge Mydei in the ruins of Castrum Kremnos. To Phainon, it feels like something from a distant past, a tradition he never personally took part in or even witnessed. For Mydei, though, it's something he actually lived through, something that carried weight far beyond a ritual. This becomes the foundation for so many of their challenges going forward, or at least for Phainon. You could also argue that he isn't just continuing the festival itself, but he's continuing the original 10-day and night challenge that marked the beginning of their relationship. In my previous video, I speculated that Phainon might have been a part of the greeting party sent to make first contact with the wandering Cremnoan detachment, and that it happened before the final Cremnos festival. Now, with a bit more distance and hindsight, it's clear that Phainon met Mydei much later, when the remnants of the Cremnoan state were fleeing their already mad god as their city collapsed into the black tide. Knowing their personalities and the way they speak to each other in the Zero cycle, it's easy to imagine how a simple diplomatic meeting could spiral into an argument that ends in a challenge that neither of them are willing to back down from. Since then, it seems like they just can't help themselves, each challenge growing more and more ridiculous, sometimes even dragging in bystanders who just want to live their lives. This is also the best time to bring up the bath scene, another continuation of their very public need to show each other who's quote-unquote boss. And I think now that we know more about their ages here, it changes a bit of how we would view this scene, especially once you realize they're much older than we initially thought. Well, at least one of them. There is still no concrete way to place Phainon in the larger timeline since it was never fully revealed, but based on context clues alone, it's safe to assume that he is younger than Mydei. What really matters here is what this scene shows us about Mydei. After spending hundreds of years as a protector and a constant for both his people and Akuma, he lets something softer slip through when he's around Phainon. There's a lightness to him, a kind of playfulness that feels almost out of place for someone who never had the chance to grow up normally. Phainon, without really meaning to, gives him access to that lost youth, even if only briefly. And to us fangirls, we get the most interesting noises to ever escape this game. Now that we've essentially covered their continuous promise ceremony, let's move on to another important symbol of their relationship. We talked about the signet back in the Zero cycle, but I think that it's given a little bit more symbolic weight to their relationship in X36. In this cycle, it is still a historic symbol of the Cremnoan people, representing the authority of the throne and the 1,000 years of blood-soaked history tied to the Cremnoan dynasty. And more importantly for Mydei, it carries a much more intimate meaning. It once belonged to his mother, Gorgo, who sacrificed her life to protect him after King Eurypon attempted to offer his own son to the Titan Nicodor. In his final act before leaving for the front lines as the demigod of strife, he hands it over to Crateros, using it to officially end the Cremnoan dynasty, a choice that is Mydei's alone, not only for himself, but for the people he hopes not to be shackled by the same past that shackled him. It's Phainon who sent Chartonis to retrieve it, returning it to him in the exact moment when Mydei was able to finally redefine its meaning. Whether or not he understands every layer of the signet's importance, Phainon recognizes its importance to Mydei, helping him turn the symbol of a cursed lineage into proof that the cycle can actually be broken. I think that's why I personally really like their relationship. Phainon takes these painful parts of Mydei's past and gives Mydei the choice of redefining it. They keep pushing each other to become better, to move past what's hurting them, and to confront things within themselves they've been avoiding. Take, for example, the entire situation surrounding the Strife Titan. I think it was pretty obvious from the beginning that Phainon was never meant for the power of strife. He craved the Titan's power because it felt like a solution to the rage that he felt inside. But strife was not a Titan that could easily become a tool for his rage, and instead of ascending, he failed because of his own inner conflict. We do know that although they arranged his challenge, 𝒖💂 and 𝒔𝒑𝒂 already knew that Phainon was never meant to inherit strife, that his true role as the world bearer was awaiting him. I think that Mydei also shared that understanding. When Phainon is unable to complete the challenge, Mydei does not step in to take this away from him. He only does what is necessary to save Phainon. In a way, they were trying to help each other. If Phainon took strife, then Mydei wouldn't have to become the god of his people when he was still trying to reject his kingly status. Although we do know that Phainon had his own reasons for wanting strife, Mydei actively rejected it, even though it was clear that he was meant for this. If you remember, he's still just a prince, never taking the mantle of king, even though he's been their de facto leader for hundreds of years. Phainon, seeing this, may have unconsciously or even consciously decided that he'd take on strife for Mydei. This is the core of their relationship. They've never had to say what was troubling them. They've always stepped into the parts of each other that were lacking without having to speak of it. They trust each other with the private parts of themselves, spoken and unspoken. The game makes this clear by having Mydei share a part of his past that he keeps hidden from everyone else. Unlike the Signet or the Cremnoans festival, this is something he has held in his heart for who knows how many centuries. He tells Phainon about the 5 friends he lost. In doing so, he isn't just opening up, he's choosing Phainon to be the keeper of something precious to him. Mydei is entrusting their memory to Phainon because he believes Mydei is the only one who is capable of carrying these stories into the new dawn. That display of trust goes even further when Mydei shares his one true weakness, the single thing that could lead to his death. This is a level of vulnerability he offers to no one else. By placing this knowledge in Phainon's hands, Mydei gives him authority over his life and death, saying that if that moment ever comes, if a decision has to be made, Phainon is the only one whose judgment he would accept. Phainon understands what truly matters to Mydei, and Mydei understands the fear and pain that shapes Phainon's choices. Their bond isn't built on power or destiny, but on shared responsibility. Their relationship is forged through tension, maintained through rivalry, and sustained by a shared unspoken understanding that neither of them has to face the worst alone again, which is, frankly, one of the most romantic narrative choices Honkai Star Rail could have ever made. No matter how well they fit together, they're constantly forced to say goodbye. It begins when Mydei leaves to fight on the front lines as the god of strife, promising Phainon that they'll meet again at the library, something the story has made sure we understand matters to the two of them. The library is not just a location, it's an important piece of lore that ties directly to Mydei's past and his promises to Phainon, which makes this moment feel like a quiet confirmation of everything that's been building between them. For other iterations of Phainon, however, the library may have represented something a little different. It is maybe even a symbol of loss, or a promise that was never meant to be fulfilled. In other reoccurrences, the Flame Reaver is said to have burned the library down, perhaps unable to live with the knowledge that he'll never truly be able to deliver on the promise they once made to each other. Though we have to come back to the library again, since its importance will be highlighted later in the story, the main reason Phainon is invited there in the first place is to be introduced to the very sparse dictionary of the Cremnoans, a dictionary that notably lacks the words fear, flee, and romance, though I gotta say, Mydei is doing pretty good at that last one. It's just that Phainon can be a little dense. One word it doesn't lack, however, is the word for scoundrel, a nickname Mydei famously uses for Phainon. It's the only confirmed word we actually know exists in the Cremnos dictionary, even though we do know that in a different cycle, Mydei did try to write a full dictionary to prove that there was more to the language than just the one word we know. Originally, HKS was used as a reference to Mydei's father. Later on, though, Mydei starts using it with Phainon, and the word that once functioned purely as an insult starts sounding like an endearment. In fact, HKS shows up on Mydei's teleslate, reinforcing that attachment. Whether that's because it's his word for Phainon or simply just the only real word left in his language is ultimately up to the viewer. Another goodbye between them takes place after Phainon gives a rallying speech to the people of Akuma. Whether or not it's a hallucination, a conversation from a different recurrence, or something that happened when the camera wasn't on them, Phainon still gets another brief goodbye with his friends. To Mydei, he says he'll never forget him, and the two of them promise that they'll duel again in the next lifetime. As you can see, there's a lot of promises between these two. But I'm sure there is actually one thing that stands out the most in this conversation, and it only really occurs in the English dub. Now, I won't sit here and say I'm a professional translator, but I do know that in the other languages, it reads more like an agreement, not an implication of a date. After everything we've seen between them, though, it's hard to really say that this wasn't deliberate. Unfortunately, though, their promised battle in the next lifetime never happens. Phainon ends up challenging Nanook himself and doesn't return in the next recurrence. In fact, we see Mydei staring at the statue of Kefali in the next cycle, as if he's grasping for something he can't remember having. I think what makes the end of the X36 cycle so devastating is because we watch the characters we've spent months getting to know die, and we never really know whether or not they'll return the same, and that uncertainty was the true tragedy of the X36 reoccurrence and those updates. And it wasn't just us saying goodbye as the player, it was the characters themselves being forced to say goodbye to the people they knew, often in the worst ways possible. We've already seen how deeply Phainon struggles to leave Mydei's side, manifesting as visible anxiety when he's forced to leave Mydei alone with Nikador in order to notify others of an impending threat. He tries desperately to return as quickly as possible, showing genuine frustration when he's unable to, even going so far as to threaten to kill a god just so he can get back to his friend. Whether this is a dependence cultivated over years of fighting together or simply an instinct born from watching each other's backs, he can't seem to pull himself away. It's as if he knows how reckless Mydei can be with his own immortality and desperately wants to shield him, to keep him from having to die more times than he already has. During their second fight with the Flame Reaver, Phainon is once again forced to leave Mydei's side to fulfill his duty as the deliverer of the dawn. The cruelty of this scene here lies in Phainon's frustrated glance back before he finally has to turn away to do what he must. The tragedy here, however, is that he never gets to return to Mydei's side again, and Mydei dies with his name on his lips.
Become the dawn, whoever.
At the end of X36, Phainon accepts the memories of his past selves and becomes Angel Non once again. While direct interaction between Phainon and Mydei ends here, I do want to turn our attention to a detail that caught my eye during this patch, something found outside of the game and in Phainon's character trailer. In this trailer, we get to see a glimpse of the life Phainon truly wants, or maybe a part of Phainon's life that we don't get to witness. Here, he and Mydei get to fight side by side, sharing the glory of the crowd, where they get to spar each other in endless rounds, in the way they've promised each other before. Mydei seems to be the center focus of Phainon's only happy moments in the trailer, which makes the explosion of rage when Mydei is killed much more impactful. The rest of my observations here may be a little bit more delusional than usual, but what is making your own shipping video if you don't get to be a little ridiculous sometimes? For me, the visual mirroring when Phainon is stabbed feels far too specific to be an accident. It's roughly in the same spot where Mydei was run through from the back. Stabbing like this does happen a lot in fights like this, but the way the camera emphasizes the blade emerging from the other side seems way more deliberate than coincidental. And this is where I get really, really delusional, so feel free to ignore me. But did no one else notice how similar Mydei and Angelnon look? The golden locks, the half nakedness, and just overall they look very, very alike. You explode millions of core flames and somehow you come out looking like your boyfriend. I'm just saying, should you be looking so much like your boyfriend after that? After all of that, we finally reach the end of our journey. There is a part of me that was scared of the ending, just like when we finished the X36 arc. I was worried we would not be able to see our boys the same way again, and that they would forget everything we've been through together. Thankfully, Hoyoverse did give us a small but significant ending to everything. While we won't see them running around with us in the overworld, we do get to see them have at least a small slice of something for themselves. A place to heal after the trauma of their situation. While I do feel there's something to be said about Mydei guarding the entrance to Phainon's dusty tomb of sort, I do feel like it is best to just go straight into their post-quest interactions, as I think this is the nail in the coffin for most of us shippers, because somehow, right at the very end, we get some of the most loaded dialogue between them. Even now, the game is trying very hard to make sure that whoever plays this game knows that the two men are together, even if they can't really say that out loud. Not only that, these silly men are out here repeating each other's signature catchphrases as a way of greeting. Let's start off with the fact that Phainon asked to bring his mom's cooking to Mydei's parents, essentially demanding to meet with his in-laws from the very start. First off, he's asking to bring food that his mother made to his boyfriend's parents, already showing the integration of their families. And sure, you might share your mom's cooking with your friends if you think she's got good cooking, but going straight to sharing it with their parents, now that has some really heavy romantic coding in my opinion. But then we get to Phainon's wishes. We, as the Trailblazer, were privy to Phainon's memories and wishes at the end of the quest, so we do know what Phainon's wishes were in the end, and we reveal that even as a child, Phainon had wished to study in Castrum Kremnos. Mydei had been under the impression that Phainon's wish had been to go back to Hades Elysiae, which is why he kept his distance when he'd seen Phainon with his family. But in actuality, Phainon had a different wish that had started to form in the emptiness that was his blank slate. Phainon beats around the bush for a little bit before Mydei finally asks him to spit it all out, and Phainon finally says it point blank. And then Mydei goes on to say what is probably the most straightforward proposal ever said in any game ever. And I dare you to find anything more romantic than this phrase. To offer his library, to say that there are no locks for Phainon, that he was always welcome there the moment the promise was made, was both to assuage Phainon of any guilt that he might have after the many times he's burnt the place down to the ground as the Flame Reaver, and also to reassure Phainon that their relationship had not deteriorated one bit since the beginning, despite everything that they've been through. It's such a loaded sentence that it makes Phainon's response to it feel a bit childish, despite the excitement denoted by how many exclamation marks was in the answer. One could say he's excited at the prospect of being able to go to Mydei's library and for the confirmation that their relationship was undamaged. But I'd like to propose something a little different. In subsequent dialogues, we see Mydei recommending very specific books to Phainon, not the dictionary that has been a prominent part of their relationship, but instead a book about how to read the air, essentially calling out the fact that Phainon missed the point. Mydei is trying to be as blunt as he can, offering Phainon an open door into his space, into his home, and something much more personal than that. Mydei is basically handing him the emotional equivalent of a house key, and Phainon seems to treat it like it's just a new map for him to explore. And to me, that's what makes the dialogue even more precious. Even Phainon thinks that he needs to check out some books on Cremnoan sayings because he's lost as to what Mydei is saying sometimes. In earlier dialogues, poetry does come up between Phainon and Mydei, with Mydei noting that Cremnoans don't bother with such weak literature. Which is funny considering Mydei is more of the poetic speaker. His words are straightforward, sure, but they're careful and loaded with meaning. Phainon assumes Mydei has a hard time with words, all the while missing a marriage proposal that is literally being shoved in his face. As I was editing the rest of this video, I realized that it was getting a little long and that it might be best to split this part into two. So this part is just their main story part, and the next video will be their side quests, the smaller flavor moments outside of the main story, and other very Phaidei coded details that I had to skip this time around. So I hope you'll all join me for a part 3, which I will absolutely 100% get to, and it will not take me 6 months to make that one, at least I hope. I do think that eventually there will also be a part 4 when we get ourselves back to Amphoreus, but until then, just anticipate the part 3 because I can't, guys. My brain is melting and I need a break from this couple just for a little bit. I will be back with that third video. Anyways, thank you again for watching. Please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel and leaving me a comment about why you like Phaidei and maybe even tell me what's your favorite moments in the main quest story. Anyways, again, thank you for watching and I'll see you guys next time.